So we have Professor Trevor Price today with us here at Punjabi University. So he is from University of Chicago and has worked quite a lot on biodiversity of Himalaya. So welcome Professor Trevor Price to the Punjabi University.
It's good to be here.
Yeah. So what prompted you to be here to work here in Himalaya?
Well, it's the most biodiverse place in the world. Second most biodiverse place in the world, and very poorly studied. There are so many questions to ask. And just historically, I ended up coming to India 50 years ago. I've been asking questions about Himalaya ever since.
So that is, you started working on, say, Himalayan biodiversity around 50 years ago.
I started working on Himalayan biodiversity about 40 years ago. About 50 years ago, I first came to India and studied mainly peninsular biodiversity before moving to the Himalaya in the 1980s.
So what is your perception right now, what you saw 40 years earlier and what is happening now?
Well, it's very different, right? It's hard to even begin to describe the changes, particularly in the last 20 years. The huge increase in wealth in India, which has got good connotations for people in some ways, but a huge increase in pollution and a huge decrease in biodiversity. So we're at a crossing point where we hope people will get richer and we can simultaneously preserve life in India.
So now we very clearly know that things have changed in the last, say, 30 or 40 years, and we are looking at climate change and other aspects, that how they are affecting the biodiversity and other anthropogenic activities, and India is no exception to that. So, but as far as Himalaya is concerned, it is considered one of the fragile ecosystems. So, what measures or what steps should be taken?
Yeah, well, it's very difficult, right? Because there's so many political issues. So my view is that we should really try and preserve a few major protected areas and focus all our efforts on the critical biodiverse areas. To be honest, outside of protected areas, it's going to be very difficult to keep much going. And if you have small protected areas, you're going to lose species as well. So the largest protected areas in India are where we should be focusing our effort right now.
Okay, and just going another way, that you have been working on birds, and which old lineages do you find in Himalayan ranges or Himalayan higher elevations?
Old lineages.
Old lineages.
So in general, the higher Himalaya has younger lineages than the lower down. And we believe that's because a lot of extinction has happened as a result of ice ages and so on, which have then created empty niches for new species to evolve into. So there are a few old lineages that have managed to survive the extinction events, one of them being well, actually, I take that back. There's no really old lineages like there are at the lower Himalaya. But there are a few, 15, 20 million year old lineages up there, such as the ground tit in birds. And, I'd be grasping at straws if I tried to tell you what plants are up there. But there's generally a climb where the oldest lineages are in the tropics, in the southeast, in the northeast. The youngest lineages are in the high elevations of Kashmir. So,
did that Eocene, Oligocene transition in climate, did it affect the distribution of birds in Himalaya too?
It did a tremendous, as far as we know, the Eocene, Oligocene transition had a major effect. It was a 5 or 6 degree cooling event, which led to the replacement of bird faunas by a whole new fauna. The passerine birds, or the songbirds, came out of Australia through Indonesia. They basically stopped at Indonesia, and then they were able to come in the Oligocene. As it cooled down, they were superior in these colder environments over the previous lot. So we think that was a really important step.
So, did you find any evidence of phylogenetic niche conservatism as compared to allopathic speciation in case of birds?
Well, I mean, there are always two things. So allopatric speciation is basically the norm in birds. Phylogenetic niche conservatism would indicate that these two species that you've got are very similar in their ecology. So the allopatric stage, when they're separated, was critical to forming the species. There are quite a few species like that in the Himalayas. The alternative is, adapting to different niches very quickly, like in Darwin's finches. And we don't see very many examples of that in the Himalaya. It's very hard actually to come up with really good examples where there's been rapid adaptive radiations recently. But if there have been, they're going to be in the high Himalaya. Maybe something like the rose finches would be the closest. Well, first of all, it's quite amazing that there are no invasive bird species in India, as far as I know. But we've documented 1,000 invasive plant species, or at least alien plant species across the Himalaya.
So in our university, we have established a center for restoration of ecosystem of Punjab. So what we are trying to do in that we are thinking that somehow we could restore the degrading ecology of Punjab. So whatever is there, we are trying to conserve that, preserve that in the sense. And on the other hand, what we are thinking that we could revive some of the lost glory or the pristine ecosystems.
Yeah.
So what are your views on that?
Well, as I said, if we have an optimistic view that the world's going to, stabilise and human population will not keep growing, and the increase in wealth that humans are experiencing will mean they value nature more, then we've got to get life through this bottleneck. And the way to do that is, or the main way to do it, is by having large reserves, which this won't help with. But there are a major important contribution is education and research. And, if people don't appreciate the value of biodiversity, we're already losing. And so to me, having a research station that's documenting nature, science in general and research in general is so important, but the education component is probably even more important.
So that is more important, that is when we start educating the masses.
Well, yeah, I mean, basically, people find it very difficult to understand why we can't just pave the whole world over and watch TV forever. But if we do that, we're almost certainly going to get a plague of cockroaches and all die from COVID, like diseases. Those sorts of things we have to get across.
So there is another question which comes into my mind many a times, that whenever we think of restoration, most of the time what we do is we try to modify the pristine ecosystem, or what, for example, it's a grassland or it's a desert and it's a perfect ecosystem which is in perfect harmony with the nature. We try to alter it with tree plantation or making some amendments. So what are your views? What do you think about that?
No, I don't think that's crazy. Yeah, the problem is that there is basically no pristine environment left, but we should definitely try and keep these environments as pristine as possible. I do not see any value in converting, there's a huge problem in India with converting grassland to forest, and the most endangered species in India are grassland species, and there's no real benefit. I mean, we could talk about a carbon sequestration benefit, but you can easily get that through other avenues. So I strongly feel that we should not do that. Having said that, we have to be a bit careful, because finding pristine habitats is not that easy.
Yeah.
We've got invasive plants, we've got a lot of hunting going on, we've got grazing going on. So, and maybe, grazing at the right level would be what ungulates were doing before we shot them all out. But it's very difficult to know what actually the world would look like without humans.
No, in Punjab the issue is that most of the land is basically 84% of the land is covered by agriculture, and the forest cover is in terms of Shivalik foothills, which is basically a subtropical forest. Then we have scrub forest, which is basically from the old ages, you can say. So it's a huge mix of things which needs to be protected in the coming times. So that way I wanted to know that what should be the right approach.
Well, I can only repeat what I said before, which is let's try and focus on some big reserves.
Yeah.
And, obviously, if we can make a big reserve where the great Indian bustard lives and really protect it, and try and, by restoration, I would say, make sure it's grazed in the way that it was historically grazed, preferably with real grazers, like natural species. But again, the biggest area in each of these biomes is where we should be focusing our efforts. And if we're looking at small areas, they're obviously valuable, they're helpful, but they're helpful also in terms of education and research as well. So I don't really know how else answer where we should be focusing our efforts, because it depends quite a bit on the resources we have. But I will.
Nowadays there is a different concept coming up, that is novel ecosystems.
Yeah.
That is then some sort of hybrid ecosystem.
Yeah.
That is, they say that is a sort of mix of pristine and novel ecosystems.
Right.
And these hybrid ecosystems, they are propagated by many of the ecologists nowadays.
Right.
That is a perfect scenario, let the nature recover itself. But when we think, or when we think in terms that let nature grow itself, so maybe some of the invasive plants or some of the other plants which are not native to that particular habitat, they keep on growing, and we keep on promoting that kind of solutions.
Well, I guess, it's just a feeling. I can't speak from the science because I don't know about the science. But I think anything that requires ongoing management is going to be tricky.
Yes.
After 10 years the funds will run out, something like that. But, some management, like introduction of wolves into Yellowstone, was a really, good thing to do. So, there was a recent paper in PNAS that talked about how alien species had actually taken over the ecological functions of species that have gone extinct. I think that makes total sense. It may help native plants if we've got things that are, eating the. If we've got grazers, if we don't have grazers, we might just end up with trees and lose all the grassland. So, we have to accept that there's been extinctions, and some management, in the sense of introducing things back, might make sense. But ongoing management, for example, removing invasive species, seems to me, we can try, but it's never going to really succeed. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, that is, you're right in the sense, because that is not the right approach, in fact. Because once we disturb, and then these alien invasive species, they invade, and then we try to uproot them. That is not the correct solution.
No, I agree with that. It's an impossible task.
Because it is better if the perfect ecosystem or pristine ecosystem, or the ecosystem which is in perfect harmony with the environment, with sort of native flora fauna, if that is protected, that itself has biotic resistance against invasions.
Yeah. But there aren't many of those left, I have to say.
Yeah, that is true. But in terms of Punjab, whenever we discuss or whenever we think, most of the focus is on tree plantation, because we forget that this ecosystem, or this is basically scrub land.
Yeah.
And scrublands are like this only. You don't find dense forests all over.
No, that's right.
Yeah. So making those or turning those into dense forests, I think you're deteriorating or destroying the typical ecology of the state.
Well, that's correct. But I mean, you would say that 84% of the land you mentioned
is under
agriculture.
Yeah.
You might call these dense forests another form of horticulture or agriculture. So they're basically commercial forests, aren't they? Like eucalyptus and what's replacing them, this conifer. So, to the extent that agriculture is going ahead, that's another commercial enterprise. So, again, a lot of land is going to commercial enterprises, to making food and buildings. So, again, we need to choose the biggest area we can that's as pristine as possible. with minimal interventions, most of them being trying to restore grazers and things that eat grazers, I suppose.
That should set an example or model for others to replicate.
Yeah. I mean, to my view, Corbett, I've never been to Corbett, but it seems like you start with Corbett, and as it starts to make money, we've already got, tourists going to regions around Corbett, and make Corbett as big as we can, and make it pay for itself. And, maybe in 30 or 40 years, a lot of agricultural land will be coming back, because I just feel that we're going to make advances in agriculture. There are major solutions that are possible if we had the effort. This is a bit off track, but we could actually free up an enormous amount of land if we decided to switch to a pescatarian diet over a meat diet, because fish are so much more efficient at converting soy. So I don't know if that's ever possible, but so that I can imagine that would be possible. You just start having aquaculture and you make it so cheap people don't want to eat beef, and then you suddenly got a lot of land. So there are possible solutions that will end up with natural land coming back. And so we just need to make sure that as many species as are left are able to do that. So that's my philosophy. But climate change is the elephant in the room now.
So thank you, Professor Trevor Price, and thanks for coming to Punjabi University. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It's a pleasure talking to you at any time.